I'm Shaun Howe, and first of all, what a powerful evening so far, right? But I'm a little weird, and those of you who know me expected that. But I'm unorthodox. I'm gonna show you things through a different light, scientifically, because I believe that if you can't back up the Bible with science, then it means nothing. And after all, 1 Peter says to be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh. We need to be ready to have an answer when the atheists want to argue. So, the question tonight that I'm going to address is thousands or billions. This has got to be the most controversial, argued, compromised area in creation science. Is the earth young or old? Secular science is telling us it's the age of this universe entirely is somewhere between 8 to 20 billion years old. Most land at around 14. The Bible teaches a very different timeline. It teaches about 6,000 years. In fact, if you want to be really picky, it's about 6,015 right now. But there are all sorts of people that believe secular science because that's what they're told as they grow up, and then they try to fit it into the Bible. So they're altering the Bible to fit man's fallible ideas. And that's a problem. But the fact is, the evidence does not support an old universe or an old earth in any way. In fact, it supports quite the opposite. It supports a very young universe. In fact, if the universe were actually as old as they say it is, it would look something like that. There'd be nothing left, no energy, no light. Everything would be uniformly cold and lifeless. We would suffer what they call a heat death. Everything's dead. Anyway, we're going to start this off on a large scale with the universe as a whole, then we're going to move down to our solar system and then end on a very familiar place, Earth. Before we get started, a fun fact. The word universe comes from two Latin words. Uni, which means single, and a verse, which is a spoken sentence. I wonder where they got that idea. But let's look at it this way. Let's look at what secular science is telling us. The evolutionary worldview says, in the beginning, nothing exploded. Ta-da! I don't get it. But that's what they're teaching. This is the I know, isn't it funny? This is the front of Discover magazine. It says, the universe burst into something from absolutely nothing. Zero. Nada. As it got bigger, it became filled with more stuff that it came from absolutely nowhere. How is that possible? Ask Alan Guth. His theory of inflation helps explain everything. It didn't explain much, by the way. But anyway, they said nothing exploded. And when they say nothing, that's called a singularity. Where everything, all matter, all space and time, are supposedly smashed together into one infinitely dense region. Then for some unknown reason, it decided to explode. Big Bang. Matter, space, and time began to expand rapidly, and the energy from this eventually condensed into elements, primarily hydrogen and helium. These gases condensed into stars, and the stars created galaxies. Inside the stars, through fusion, these elements were fused into heavier elements, all the other ones on the periodic table. And eventually the star died. That's a nova or a supernova. And all this gas got scattered around again. Then the gas would come back together in a planetary nebula, and it would all smash together, and then the star would form like it did before in their imaginary universe. And the planets came out of the heavier elements from the old star. And then 4.6 billion years ago, on an insignificant planet in the middle of nowhere, some slime decided to come to life and evolved into you. You feel special now? As if it really needs help. Let's poke some holes in it. We'll start with the beginning. Nothing exploded. Well, that's what they say now. It started off as being an object about a few light years in diameter. Then it was 275 million miles. And it's 71 million miles. And it's 54,000 miles. Then they made a big jump, a trillionth the diameter of a proton. And now, nothing at all. This defies most, if not all, known scientific laws. For example, the law of cause and effect. You can't have an effect without a cause. So why did nothing explode? This is an unanswerable question. Also, first law of thermodynamics. This says matter cannot be created or destroyed. Well, the Big Bang would require this law to be broken because it created matter. So it's now outside the natural world because that is a supernatural event, which makes it contradictory to itself because it's supposed to be a naturalistic view of origins. And I could keep listing laws and why it's wrong, but I'm just going to move on from now. But speaking of laws, where did the laws come from? Our universe is very finely tuned for our existence, and if any of the laws that we have changed even slightly, we all die. For example, if gravity was slightly stronger or slightly weaker, we all die. Imagine gravity as a ruler stretched across the entire known universe from end to end, split up into 1-inch increments all the way across the entire universe, end to end. On this ruler, gravity is represented by 1 inch. If gravity moved over 1 inch on that ruler in either direction, we die. It's that fragile. And there are a ton of other laws that are very finely tuned for our life. For example, if we had no strong nuclear force, atoms couldn't hold together and we die. If there was no electromagnetic force, there's no chemical bonding and we die, and the list goes on and on and on. You see, God gives laws. Not just laws to live by, but laws that allow life itself. Moving on, then they say, energy condensed into matter. Sounds crazy, but think about it. It's possible. Genesis 1:3 says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So how did God create? He spoke it into existence. Speech is energy, not matter. What did he create? He created light. Light is energy, not matter. So, therefore, speech and light became matter. That's good science, forced on a bad theory. Then they say, lighter elements collapsed into the planetary nebula to form the stars and eventually the planets. This violates Boyle's gas law. Because if you try to compress a gas, pressure builds up, heat builds up, and it drives them back apart. And this force is much stronger than gravity. They always like to make gravity the hero of the plot. So go ahead and try and squeeze gas together and see how easy it is. It doesn't work. There's no way it's going to just collapse in on itself and form a star. It doesn't work. And there are no gigantic star molds floating around in space smashing all the gas together. It's just, well, not that I've seen. Let's do an exercise. Everybody stand up. If you can. Anyway, every single one of you that stood up just overpowered the entire planet's gravity with your legs. Gravity is not a strong force. You can sit down now. Just wanted to show you that. It's fun being up here. Anyway, they say despite this, they see new stars forming in clouds of dust. Isn't that great? But they say they see new stars forming in clouds of dust because the spots are getting brighter. How about this? The star was already there. The dust is moving. And even if they're even defying their own logic, because isn't this supposed to take billions of years? You're not going to actually see the progress. But nobody thinks to ask questions. Anyway, then they say all these stars formed magically, and these stars came together and formed galaxies. Galaxies are an excellent proof of a young universe because galaxies still have spiral arms. The stars in the middle are circling faster than the stars on the outside, so it's winding them up. So over billions of years, they should all be just disks. There should not be arms anymore. Eventually, over billions of years, supposedly, these stars exploded. We call these nova or supernova. We know it doesn't take billions of years because we only see about 300 supernova remnants, and we find a new one on average every 30 years. So 6,000 years divided by 30 each year equals 200 predicted remnants. 14 billion years divided by 30 each year is almost 500 million predicted remnants. Who's closer? stars burn out a lot faster than we think. In fact, all the ancient astronomers referred to Sirius as a red star. Now it's a white dwarf. That happened in a few thousand years. In fact, I would theorize that the death of our own star is the way in which God will destroy the earth in the end. Read 2 Peter 3:10-12. It says, "But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise. The elements shall melt with fervent heat, and the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in holy conversation and godliness? Looking for and hastening unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements will melt with fervent heat." Okay, so what's it describing here? It says there's going to be a sudden event involving a great noise, fervent heat, the sky on fire, and all the elements melting. What else could it be? I can't think of anything else. In fact, the evidence supports this theory as well, because the sun's protective bubble is shrinking. This article says the sun is through fusion, through solar wind, through fusion, it creates what's called the heliosphere. The heliosphere is a big protective bubble that goes pretty much around the whole solar system. It's created by fusion in the star. But it's suddenly rapidly shrinking, meaning less fusion, meaning dying star. It's running out of fuel. But I wouldn't worry about it. The next verse says, "Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness." So, personally, I'm excited. Anyway, back to tearing up the evolutionary model. In this nebula, material recondensed with the heavy elements from fusion from the previous star, producing planets. And these clouds again break Boyle's gas law, recreate the new star and the planets. But if this model were true, then we could make some predictions. That's how all good scientific models work. They make specific and accurate predictions. And we could say the planets near the center would not have certain elements, like volatile elements would be burned up by the newly formed star. Well, one of these volatile elements would be water, and I know where there's a whole lot of water. Water is hydrogen and oxygen. Those burn quick. And their theory to explain the Earth, they just proved the Earth wrong. I'm pretty sure the Earth is here. I'm pretty sure. But, I don't know. Anyway, they've seen this problem. They try to fix it. They say, well, yeah, the water wasn't here in the beginning, but it was bombarded here by comets over billions of years. They just landed little puddles at once, little bit by little bit. Eventually, they got high enough technology to go test this. They landed on a comet and took samples of it. The ice in a comet has very different composition than the ice we have here on Earth. For example, the ice in a comet has very high levels of deuterium. On Earth, we have next to none. Comets also prove an excellent proof of a young universe because comets only have a 10,000-year lifespan at most. The more they orbit the sun, the more material they lose. That's just how it works. The stuff's flying off. Eventually, you're going to run out. And secular science has tried to come up with solutions to this problem, primarily the Oort cloud and the Kuiper belt. And let's ruin these. The Oort cloud is a massive shell of comets around the solar system. It is 50,000 astronomical units away. If you don't know how far an astronomical unit is, or AU, it is the distance from the Earth to the sun. 93 million miles. This is the best picture we can get of Pluto, and it is 39 astronomical units away. We're never going to see a comet at 50,000 astronomical units away. There is no evidence of this existing. There's no observation of this existing. The only reason they say it exists is because they need it to exist for the universe to be old. Even Carl Sagan says, many scientific papers are written each year about the Oort cloud, its properties, its origin, its evolution. Yet there is not a shred of direct observational evidence for its existence. There's no Oort cloud. Next, they say there's the Kuiper belt. And how they say this works is, well, basically it's a giant ring of comets around all the other planets, like the picture shows. And they say it formed very close in. I mean, still on the outer edge, but very close in, and then eventually migrated away. But they forgot one part. during the migration process, as they drift away, they're going to slam into each other and they're going to break each other apart because, like I said, gravity is not strong enough to just make them all cling together. Obviously, we can test that right now. Go outside, find some rocks. They're not just going to cling together, they're going to bust apart. Eventually, they actually did some tests. They went out there and they looked for this thing, the Kuiper Belt. And I'll give them a little credit, they found a handful of things. But it was nowhere near how much they needed. I think one test said they looked in a specific area, they predicted like 86 comets, and they found like 3. It's not going to work. But regardless, ignoring these facts, they say this is how the solar system formed. Well, if it all came from a spinning disk, why exactly do we have planets spinning in different directions? Why do we have moons rotating in different directions? Why do we have some planets that have moons going in both directions at the same time? Why do we find exoplanets, which are planets around different stars? They're orbiting in the wrong direction of which their parent star is rotating. This is all violating the conservation of angular momentum. It says if an object is spinning, the outside is moving faster than the inside, so therefore if anything breaks off, it's going to be spinning in the same direction because the outside is still moving faster than the inside. So no, we did not come from one spinning disk. I think it's funny how God designed everything just to kind of make it impossible to explain any other way. Why does Mercury still have a magnetic field? A magnetic field is generated because there is a molten core. But Mercury is tiny. It's just barely bigger than our own moon. But if it was billions of years old, it would have frozen solid real quick. But it doesn't. It still has a magnetic field, so it still has a molten core. Think about it. The sun is shrinking pretty quick, at about 5 million tons per second, or 5 feet an hour. Well, we can take this and do some math. Run the clock backwards. 4.6 billion years ago, the sun would be 38 billion miles in diameter, assuming the rate has always been the same. The solar system is, we'll say, 2.8 billion miles in diameter. So therefore, according to their logic, the sun would be 13.6 times the size of the entire solar system 4.6 billion years ago. I don't buy it. Why does Saturn still have rings? The rings are expanding away from the planet. They should be long gone. Why do we still have a moon? The moon is expanding away from us. A few centimeters a year. It's nothing significant now, but if you ran it back billions of years, we couldn't actually have a moon more than 1.4 billion years ago, optimistically. If it went any further back, it would be in contact. We'd have a moon rolling around. That'd be bad. Also, the moon creates the tides. If it gets any closer, the tides are going to be higher. So when it gets close enough, the tides would get to a point where they would flood the planet twice a day. So how exactly would life evolve with a global flood twice a day? They don't think these things through. When they landed on the moon, a lot of people were afraid because they expected the moon to be billions of years old. The amount of dust that would have accumulated in billions of years, a lot of people were afraid that when the lander landed, it would just sink into the dust and disappear forever. Thankfully for the astronauts, it's only a few thousand years old, and there's still a rocky surface so they could actually land without sinking. But that does prove it's only a few thousand years old. They ignore these facts too. They continue by saying, the Earth in its formation was a hot ball of molten rock. Well, radiopolonium halos disprove this, but we're going to talk about that later. Over time, water somehow magically got to the planet and created primordial soup. Isn't that great? I want to buy some. Eventually, the soup got struck by lightning, and again, ta-da, the first single-celled life. You see, these guys seem to think that the ingredients to life are just add water. It's more complicated. It really is. The odds of an amoeba, it appears to not be a complex creature. An odds of an amoeba forming by chance are 1 out of 10 to the 40,000th power. If you don't know how big that number is, it's 1 out of that. It didn't happen by chance. And that is 1 cell. A human being, on average, has about 50 trillion cells. But somehow, magically, the first single cell that formed out of slime evolved into you, me, and every other thing that's alive in the world, and that's the theory of evolution in a nutshell. Well, people say, couldn't God have guided evolution? Technically, he could have. He can do anything. But he didn't. He told us how he did it in the first chapter and several other places through Scripture. And he sums it up in the last verse of the first chapter. He says, God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. In the evening and the morning was the sixth day. This says, he made everything in 6 days, fully functional, with no flaws. It was perfect. It was very good. See, a God that would use evolution is cruel, wasteful, and too stupid to get it right the first time. And on top of that, he's lying to us because that's not what his book says. That's not my God. Evolution is unscriptural, and to believe in it without God is simply insanity. Life cannot arise from chance, as I've already shown. Even getting an Earth-like planet that can support life is nearly impossible, given the fact that you already have the laws in place. Now you need a planet that has the right distance from the home star, right type of home star, protected by gas giants, right place in the galaxy, right size planet, nearly perfectly circular orbit, oxygen-rich atmosphere, large moon, strong magnetic field, but not too strong, moderate rotation speed, and that's just to name a few. Earth was fine-tuned for our survival. There's no other conclusion you can draw from that. But we'll pick at this more another day. This really has nothing to do with the young age of the Earth. Earth's rotation is slowing down. Every few years we have to have what's called a leap second, because the Earth is slowing down, and we have to readjust our clocks accordingly. Again, if you run the clock backwards on this, eventually you get to a point where every day would be like sun up, sundown, sun up, sundown, sun up. You're not going to live in that. You couldn't live in that. The wind would be ridiculous from the Coriolis effect from the spin of the planet. No life would be able to survive here. Fun fact here, the Bible talks about the Coriolis effect. It says, the wind goeth toward the south and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. Didn't know that, did you? Earth's magnetic field is declining. We've seen that. We've observed that. And people say, yes, it's declining right now, but it's going through a pattern of reversals. It's getting stronger and then it's getting weaker. No, it's not. They say they find magnetically aligned rocks at the bottom of ocean trenches, and this proves the polarity flip of the Earth. The fact is, they don't find these like that. They find a jumbled up mess. It's completely obliterated at the bottom of these ocean trenches, which I would argue would be in the flood when the fountains of the deep broke open. This is where the water came through. Logically, that place would be completely obliterated. It makes sense. And really, even if you don't believe me on that, it really doesn't matter, because with or without reversals, the total strength of the planet is declining, and the reversals wouldn't change that. Just because the magnet flips doesn't mean it's getting stronger. Earth has been observed to lose 10% of its magnetic strength in the last 150 years, and 40% of its magnetic strength in the last 1,000 years. It's running out quick. And again, if you ran the clock back on this, if it just kept getting stronger as you went back in time, about 25,000 years ago, Earth would be uninhabitable because of the amount of heat here. Nothing would be able to survive. Next, people say, don't radiometric decay methods prove the Earth is billions of years old? And before I get into this, I'd like to say, side note, well, first of all, there are many different types of radiometric decay methods, like a lot, but they're all, every single one of them, based on the decay of an element. Everything is running down, not building up. Evolution says, given time, things will get more complex and get bigger, better, stronger, whatever. But they don't. This proves it in one small way. But I'm not going to talk about the many hundreds of different types of radiometric decay, but we're going to hit the top two, carbon dating and potassium-argon dating. And we'll start with carbon dating. And for those who are here in my Dinosaurs and Creation seminar, it's basically the same information. So this is a review for you. How it works is it measures the amount of C14 in an object, or in a living thing, and it compares that to the amount of C14 in the atmosphere. The atmosphere today has 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 0.06% carbon dioxide, and 0.0000765% radioactive carbon-14. What happens is the sun rays come down, they beat up the nitrogen, and they turn it into a carbon, but it still has same atomic mass as the nitrogen, so it's radioactive, unstable carbon-14. On average, about half of this will decay back into regular carbon every 5,730 years. Oh, sorry, decay into nitrogen. One or the other. Anyway, C14 is in the air, so the plants breathe it in, and then the animals eat the plants, so then it's now in the animals and the plants. Then eventually the plant and animal dies, and the C14 in it begins to decay, which it always was, but now there's nothing left to replace it, so the amount declines. And if they find a fossil, they say it has half as much carbon-14 in it than we do in the atmosphere today. They say it's been dead for 5,730 years, or one half-life. The problem is, for this to work, the amount of carbon-14 produced each year has to equal the amount destroyed each year. This is called equilibrium. But the fact is, it doesn't. We gain 28 to 37% more C14 than we lose each year. So we have not reached equilibrium. When you run all the math on this, you find out it would take about 30,000 years to reach equilibrium. Anyway, but they ignore this fact because they know the Earth is billions of years old, and they just shove it under the rug. But knowing this, to date anything would be impossible because you'd have to know when it lived to know how much C14 it was breathing to be able to calculate when it lived. It's impossible. This also proves the fact that the Earth is at least younger than 30,000 years old by the fact that we haven't reached equilibrium yet. And the biggest problem is, even in a perfect situation with everything working properly, it still doesn't work. One part of a mammoth is 29,000 years old. Another part of the same mammoth is 44,000 years old. It's not working. Living mollusk shells still alive were dated at 2,300 years old. Living penguins were 8,000 years old. Shell from a living snail was 27,000 years old. I like this quote right here. In the last 2 years, an absolute date has been obtained for the Gangdong beds above the Trinil beds. It is a very interesting value of 300,000 years. Plus or minus 300,000 years. Hit the nail on the head. Let's look at some of their testing. They tested sample 299. They found out it is less than 20,000 years old. Test the sample down here. It is greater than 28,000 years old. Okay. One's less than 20,000, one's greater than 28,000. Until you find out it's the same sample. I don't think that's mathematically possible. I mean, I didn't do that great in math class, but I can figure that out. Why do diamonds still contain carbon-14? They say they took millions of years to form, millions of years ago, and carbon-14 at its best can only go back about 60, 70,000 years. These diamonds still contain carbon-14, and they were not contaminated. Diamond is the strongest substance we have on Earth. There's no way around that. If the C14 date supports our theories, we put it in the main text. If it does not entirely contradict them, we put it in a footnote. If it's completely out of date, we just drop it. That's the logic they have. They pick and choose whatever number they want. I don't know why they waste their time and money testing it. Why don't they know what they're going to write down. Why don't they just write it down? They're going to lie either way, you know? Anyway, moving on. Potassium-argon dating. Potassium decays to argon. And the potassium's half-life is about 1.25 billion years. A little longer. How it's supposed to work is it dates volcanic activity. When a volcano erupts, obviously the rock is molten, and gases like argon can escape out of the molten rock. Now the clock is reset because it has no argon in it at all, and any argon that accumulates from this point indicates how long it's been since the volcanic activity. That's how it's supposed to work. Well, this guy says as much as 80% of the potassium in a small sample of an iron meteorite can be removed by distilled water in 4.5 hours. If you can take out 80% of the parent element in 4.5 hours with water, how can you ever know how much there was to start with? That's a pretty important piece of information. Anyway, let's see if it's working. The KBS Tough. Tough is an ash layer. They dated it multiple times, many people, many times. It was determined to be, they all agreed, it was 212 to 230 million years old. Till eventually, a human skull was found underneath it. But wait, man didn't evolve till 3 million years ago. So now, the only thing they have left to say is, aliens were here. They look just like us. After this, They redated the rocks again. Keep in mind, they've already dated it a bunch of times. They all agreed it is confirmed 212 to 230. Now they find this. They redate it. Suddenly it's 0.5 to 2.6 million years old. I think they're writing their own rules here. Mount Etna in Sicily was erupted in 122 BC. They had written records of this. They dated it. It erupted 250,000 years ago. Volcano erupted in Hawaii in 1801. The potassium argon dated it. It is 1.6 million years old. No. Another volcano in Hawaii erupted in 1959. Basalt was potassium argon dated at 8.5 million years old. See, any type of radiometric decay is built on assumptions. Primarily three. One was there was no daughter elements to start with, meaning argon would be the daughter element of potassium because potassium decays into argon. They assume there never was any to start with. There's no way to know that. They say there was never any contamination. There's no way to know that. Because you weren't there watching the rock for billions of years, supposedly. And they say the rate of decay has always been the same. That one is a logical assumption, but regardless, still an assumption. There's no way they know that. It's interesting to see the inflation of the age of the Earth. In 1770, it was 70,000 years old. In 1905, it was 2 billion years old. In 1969, when they landed on the moon, it was 3.5 billion years old. Today, it's at 4.6 billion years old. At this rate, the Earth is aging by 21 million years per year, or 40 years a minute. It's getting old quick. The RATE project did great work on granite deep underground and the zircons in it. They took samples from many different depths, many different locations, and they tested the zircons in the granite. A zircon is a tiny, tiny little crystal, and in it, it contains uranium and lead, because the uranium decays into lead. And it's all kept in this little capsule. It cannot be contaminated. These things can even go through a volcano without melting. And I would then ask how it formed in the first place if at one point the Earth was all molten. But that's besides the point right now. As uranium decays, it releases alpha particles, which are 2 protons and 2 neutrons. It shoots these things out, and eventually they catch some electrons, and it becomes helium. So as the uranium decays, it produces lead and helium. And to keep a very, very long story short, they took all this data, they made 2 predictions. One based on secular uniformitarian beliefs in billions of years, one based on biblical creation and a young Earth. When they got the data back, it fit perfectly with the creation model. Dr. Humphreys, who was on this project, said he has never seen in his entire career any data fit so perfectly with a prediction before. See, the evidence from nuclear decay, assuming the rate was always the same, indicates 1.5 billion years. The evidence from helium diffusion indicates roughly 6,000 years. Nuclear decay is obviously a nuclear process. Helium diffusion is a chemical process. So at some point in the past, they say nuclear decay rate was greatly accelerated, while the helium diffusion rate stayed consistent. In fact, they say this instance of accelerated decay occurred about 6,000 years ago, plus or minus 2,000 years. Then what happens? Zircons, as they shoot out all these particles, they form rings around them, or halos, whatever you want to say. They're both good terms. And then, as most rocks do, granite has water flowing through it. It picks up some of the particles that were released and carries them away to somewhere else. And one of the most important of these products is polonium. As the polonium decays, it also creates rings on a smaller scale, or halos. Actually, they're not rings, they're spheres. But when you look at them through a microscope, you're seeing 2-dimensional, so we call them rings, or halos. And it can create a lot of different types of rings, each with a different half-life. But any of them have a very short half-life. The longest is about a month. Some occur in minutes or seconds. And this matters, because this will only form in solid material. So that tells us that when this accelerated decay occurred, the granite was already cooled, not molten for millions of years. There you go. That's it for that. That's a little technical for people. I'm sorry. It confuses me too. The Sahara Desert has a prevailing wind pattern. Prevailing wind means that the wind in the desert almost always goes in the same direction. What happens is the hot air from the desert blows off to the stuff next to the desert, and it kills it, the vegetation, because it's hot. So it eventually expands the desert. When you look at the desert closely, you find out it started forming about 4,000 years ago. This isn't particularly solid evidence, but it is an interesting coincidence that it fits pretty much perfectly. I just wanted to throw that out there. I think it's amazing, even if it's not solid proof. Pressure from oil underneath the rocks is too great to hold for more than about 10,000 years. Eventually, the pressure underneath will split the rock, the oil will leak off and ooze up on the surface somewhere. But the oil is still underground. Explain that. And no, it did not take millions of years for oil to form. There's a factory in Texas that takes turkey guts, they say, and makes oil. They say, we duplicated what Mother Nature does, but what Mother Nature took millions of years to do, we do in about 30 minutes. Salt levels in the ocean, about 3.6%, only account for a couple thousand years of accumulation. See, what happens is, when it rains, the water runoff from the continents takes with it sediments, including salt. It goes into the ocean and it just keeps accumulating. But there's only enough there to account for a few thousand years. Also, along the same note, the sediment levels, the amount of sediment on the bottom of the ocean floor, again, only counts for a few thousand years. The continents will be eroded flat in 14 million years. So why do we still have continents? Well, people say, well, yes, we have continents, but they're rising up from the tectonic activity. They keep rising up. True. But why are there still fossils on the top of them? The fossils would rise up with the continent and be washed off the top. So it really, there is no rescuing device for this. All the civilizations in the world appeared out of nowhere just a few thousand years ago. It's like they just moved in and built a city. I wonder why it's like that. Genesis 11:8. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth. It's like that because that's what happened. After Babel, God scattered everybody across the face of the earth. They were all fully formed, intelligent human beings. They went out, they built their cities wherever they decided to, really, in a very short time. Evolution theory doesn't have an explanation for that. The population level in the world indicates that we've only been here a few thousand years. If man had been here for 3 million years, like evolution says, the population would be so ridiculously immense, no one would be able to survive here. It would be something along the lines of, several thousand people per square inch. We haven't been here that long, and they see this problem, and they try to fix it. They say there was a genetic bottleneck due to a supervolcano that erupted and killed a whole bunch of people 70,000 years ago. This solves two problems for them. It says why the population levels are not ridiculously high, and it also says why we're so genetically different from apes. Because our gene pool is isolated. I have a better theory. But don't fall for the overpopulated propaganda. It's a joke. There's plenty of room out there. God knows how long it's going to take to fill up the earth, and he'll end it before then. But it's Satan's plan to reduce the population of the world. Isn't that disturbing? God's plan is the opposite. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. God wants more children. He doesn't want less. That's where I'm going to wrap it up. You see, it only takes one good, solid, undebatable evidence that the earth is young. Here you see a bunch. And there's more. These are just the ones that are easy to explain, really. But yet again, the Bible has stood the test of science, and the humanistic worldview has fallen apart.